Welcome to Hidden Chapters. The cost wasn't immediate. It still had to be paid. Let's begin. My son thought he was starting a career. I thought he was walking into something controlled. Years later, on a battlefield far from home, we met again, and neither of us expected how. This is the story of how opportunity turned into confrontation. The offer arrived quietly. Not through official channels. Not through job boards. Just a message forwarded through a mutual contact, someone who knew people in private security contracting. The kind of vague phrasing that sounds harmless until you examine it closely. My son treated it like opportunity. Good salary. Structured training. Travel possibilities. Mentorship from experienced operators. For a young man figuring out direction after school, it sounded ideal. Too ideal. I'd spent enough years around NATO advisory programs to recognize recruitment patterns. Legitimate ones are transparent. Requirements clear. Paperwork extensive. Interviews formal. This wasn't like that. Minimal documentation. Fast-track selection. Emphasis on discretion rather than qualification. And a strange insistence that not everyone gets this chance. Scarcity language creates urgency. Urgency reduces scrutiny. What exactly do they do? I asked him one evening. Security consulting, he said. Private contracting. Nothing extreme. Who runs it? He hesitated. That part's flexible. Flexible organizational structure in security work usually means layered accountability, or lack of it. Still, I didn't forbid anything. Experience taught me that direct prohibition often pushes young adults deeper into questionable opportunities. Better to question calmly. Let them think critically. So I asked practical things. Contracts. Insurance. Training standards. Legal oversight. He had partial answers. Enough to reassure himself. Not enough to reassure me. But the decisive detail came from someone else. A former colleague recognized the program's name indirectly. Not criminal exactly. But adjacent to operations where influence mattered more than transparency. Selective recruitment. Behavioral conditioning. Emphasis on loyalty and silence. Training silence. That phrase stayed with me. Because silence can protect people. Or control them. My wife sensed my concern before I voiced it fully. She always does. You think it's more than a job, she said. Yes. But you can't stop him. No. She nodded. That means you guide. Not block. She was right. So I talked to him honestly. No accusations. No dramatic warnings. Just perspective from someone who'd seen how opportunity sometimes masks leverage. He listened. He respected the concern. But he still went. Young adults choose their own paths. That's necessary. Sometimes painful. Often unavoidable. The program moved fast. Orientation. Travel. Training modules. Communication becoming less frequent but not alarming. Everything professionally framed. Structured. Controlled. Months passed. Then a year. Updates grew shorter. More careful. He sounded confident, but also guarded in a way I hadn't heard before. Not unhappy. Just measured. Like someone trained to filter information automatically. I told myself it was normal professional adaptation. Until I saw the emblem. Not at home. Not on paperwork. But years later, in a conflict briefing thousands of miles away. Same symbol. Same organization. Operating in a combat support role. That's when the realization landed. That job interview hadn't just offered him a career. It had placed him inside a system I was about to encounter operationally. And neither of us knew yet that we'd meet again there. Not as family, but as participants on opposite sides of a very complicated situation. At first, nothing about his new job looked dangerous. Structured training schedules, professional instructors, controlled travel. The kind of polished presentation private security companies use when they want recruits, and their families, to feel comfortable. My son sounded confident, focused, even proud. And I wanted to believe that was enough. But something small kept bothering me. He never talked about what they actually trained for. Skills, yes. Discipline, yes. Physical conditioning, yes. But never context. Never operational purpose. Professionals usually discuss mission type, even casually. Silence about purpose usually means purpose is sensitive. Or complicated. Or both. Communication gradually shifted too. Not less frequent, but more filtered. Conversations became efficient. Answers shorter. Emotional tone flatter. Not unhappy, just controlled. Like someone consciously managing what they reveal. That's when I recognized it. Behavioral conditioning. Not extreme. Not coercive. Subtle enough that most people wouldn't notice. But years in NATO advisory work taught me how organizations shape communication patterns intentionally. You train reflexes first. Then judgment. Then silence. I didn't confront him directly. Instead, I asked indirect questions. About colleagues. Training environments. Oversight structures. Insurance coverage. Legal frameworks. He always had answers. Prepared answers. And prepared answers rarely come from spontaneous understanding. My wife noticed it too. He sounds older, she said one evening after a call. Older or guarded? I asked. Both. She wasn't worried exactly. Just aware. Military families learn that emotional distance sometimes accompanies professional growth. Still, this felt slightly different. More deliberate. Months passed. He traveled more. Different countries. Short assignments. Always described as routine support work. Logistics. Security coordination. Advisory roles. Nothing overtly operational. But the emblems started appearing in unexpected places. Industry briefings. Private contractor reports. Occasionally in NATO peripheral coordination documents, never central, always adjacent. Support roles that influence environments without attracting scrutiny. That strategic positioning. I began asking former colleagues discreetly. Most responses were neutral. Some cautious. A few openly skeptical. One comment stuck. They recruit people who won't ask too many questions, and train them not to start later. That matched what I was seeing. Not illegal necessarily. But controlled. And control becomes risky when transparency disappears. Then his communication slowed again, not dramatically, just enough to notice. Fewer casual calls. More scheduled check-ins. Language increasingly professional even in personal conversations. That's when I realized something important. This wasn't just employment. It was assimilation into a system. A system built on loyalty, discretion, and operational flexibility. None of those are inherently bad. Unless they serve purposes recruits don't fully understand. Years went by like that. He advanced quickly. Promotions. Specialized training. Increasing responsibility. Always framed positively. Always professionally. And I kept watching from a respectful distance. Not interfering. Not judging. Just aware. Until the briefing. Thousands of miles away. Different context entirely. NATO coordination session about contractor presence in an emerging conflict zone. And there it was. That emblem again. Same program. Same network. Operating in an active theater now. Support role, officially. But proximity to combat changes everything. That's when the unease shifted into something heavier. Because suddenly the abstract concern about my son's career had become operational reality. And I didn't know yet how directly our paths were about to cross. Only that they would. Sooner than either of us expected. Seeing that emblem in the briefing changed the way I listened to everything afterward. Until then, my son's career existed in a separate mental compartment: private security, consulting, structured travel, controlled risk. Adjacent to military work sometimes, but never directly intersecting. Now the intersection was official. The conflict zone wasn't hypothetical. NATO advisory presence confirmed. Contractor support expanding. Logistics, intelligence filtering, security coordination, all the quiet roles that shape outcomes without making headlines. And his organization was there. Not Frontline, officially. But close enough that lines blur fast. I didn't contact him immediately. Operational awareness first. Emotional reactions later. That's how you avoid mistakes in mixed civilian-military environments. So I focused on context. Terrain reports. Political dynamics. Contractor mandates. Chain of command boundaries. The kind of background information that clarifies risk without revealing specifics. What I found didn't alarm me immediately. But it unsettled me. The organization he worked for wasn't just supporting stability. It was mediating influence. Managing access. Acting as intermediary between local authorities, international forces, and private infrastructure. Power without official accountability. That can stabilize environments. Or complicate them. Depends who's directing it. Weeks later, deployment orders came. Advisory role again. Not combat leadership, but operational coordination. My experience fit the need: understanding contractor integration, communication protocols, civilian interface management. Professional assignment. Routine on paper. Personal implications less routine. I debated telling him. Transparency builds trust, but operational overlap complicates communication. In the end, I chose partial honesty, informed him I'd be in the region, unspecified role, no operational detail. He responded professionally. Almost too professionally. Stay safe, he said. It's complex there. Not, I'll see you. Not, maybe we can meet. Just acknowledgement. That reinforced what I'd sensed for years. He'd learned compartmentalization well. Arrival in theater brought the usual adjustments. Climate, terrain, communication tempo, local political sensitivities. Nothing unexpected. Advisory environments are rarely dramatic day-to-day. They're about preventing escalation quietly. Contractor presence was visible but controlled. Different patches, different emblems, different operational cultures overlapping uneasily. And occasionally, his emblem. Never directly attached to him. Just present. That ambiguity carried weight. Then came the convoy briefing. Joint movement. Humanitarian support route. Contractor coordination required. Potential hostile interference flagged but assessed low probability. Standard risk language. Until I saw the roster. His organization listed. No individual names, just unit designation. Still, the proximity was real now. Same operational space. Same timeline. Same uncertainty. I didn't overthink it. Professional distance matters in conflict zones. Emotional distraction increases risk. You focus on mission parameters, communication clarity, safety protocols. But internally, one thought stayed persistent. If our paths crossed operationally, neither of us would have full control over the circumstances. And circumstances in conflict environments don't wait for family considerations. They follow momentum. The convoy moved out at first light 2 days later. Routine formation. Civilian supplies. Contractor vehicles integrated smoothly. Communication clean. Terrain manageable. Everything looked normal. Until kilometer 19. That's where normal stopped. The map showed open road. Flat terrain. Minimal infrastructure. Low assessed threat level. The kind of route planners mark as routine once enough convoys pass without incident. But experience teaches you something simple. Maps record what was, not what changed overnight. We were moving in staggered formation, humanitarian truck center, security vehicles front and rear, contractor liaison vehicles interspersed. Standard configuration when civilian supplies are involved. Radio traffic stayed calm. Until the lead vehicle slowed. Then stopped. No panic in the voice-over comms, just controlled confusion. Unexpected checkpoint ahead. Stand by. Checkpoint. Not on the briefing. Not on satellite review. Not on local authority coordination lists. That alone raised alert levels quietly. Through binoculars I saw them, uniforms correct, vehicles plausible, posture disciplined. Too disciplined, actually. Real local checkpoints usually carry a bit of improvisation. These looked rehearsed. Professional. And then I saw the emblem. Not on everyone. Just on one vehicle parked slightly off-axis, like oversight rather than enforcement. Same emblem my son's organization used. My chest tightened, not fear, not exactly. Recognition mixed with uncertainty. Coincidence possible. But unlikely. Command asked for confirmation. Documents presented looked legitimate. Permits aligned with recent administrative changes we hadn't been briefed on yet. That happens in fast-moving environments. Bureaucracy lags reality. Still, something didn't fit. The spacing. The eye contact patterns. The way the checkpoint personnel watched contractor vehicles more closely than humanitarian trucks. Selective attention signals intent. I advised caution without escalation. Slow approach. Keep communication open. Avoid sudden movements. That's when everything shifted. Second group appeared from terrain we'd assessed as low cover. Not charging. Just positioning. Blocking withdrawal routes subtly. Classic containment setup. Radio chatter sharpened instantly. No shots fired yet. No overt hostility. Just pressure. The lead security officer requested clarification. Calm voice. Professional tone. But the answer came delayed, too delayed. Delay buys positioning time. Then came the first aggressive move. A vehicle door opened quickly. Not threatening directly, but enough to signal readiness. Our convoy tightened formation automatically. Training reflex. Humanitarian drivers stayed composed, credit to their experience. Panic causes accidents faster than hostility sometimes. I focused on de-escalation. Communication clear. Hands visible. No provocative movement. And then I saw him. Not clearly. Just posture. Height. Movement style. Familiar in a way that bypassed conscious analysis at first. He was with the off-axis vehicle. Same emblem. Same calm stance. Same controlled observation I'd recognized years earlier during his training period. I told myself it couldn't be him. Operational overlap happens, but direct confrontation between family members in conflict zones? Statistically rare. Still, the resemblance unsettled me. Negotiations began formally. Documents rechecked. Command channels activated. Time stretched in that peculiar way it does when everyone knows something significant is unfolding but nobody wants it to escalate first. Then a miscommunication somewhere up-chain triggered movement on their side. Not gunfire. Just forward positioning. But enough to collapse the fragile calm. Security teams responded defensively. Vehicles repositioned. Communication accelerated. And suddenly the situation wasn't a checkpoint anymore. It was an operational standoff. One wrong signal away from escalation. And somewhere behind that emblem. Someone who might, or might not, have been my son. Was part of it. I kept my focus professional. Because in moments like that, family speculation isn't helpful. Clarity is. And clarity comes from surviving the moment first. The hardest part of any standoff isn't fear. It's uncertainty. Fear you can manage. Training handles that. Procedures exist. Communication channels open. Everyone knows roughly how to behave under stress. Uncertainty is different. Because you don't know whether you're minutes from resolution, or escalation. The checkpoint stayed controlled, but tension built steadily. Both sides professional enough not to overreact, yet cautious enough not to relax either. That fragile balance is where most conflict decisions quietly form. Command channels stayed active. Verification requests sent. Higher headquarters contacted. Diplomatic liaison teams alerted. Standard steps. Time. Time is usually the goal in situations like this. But someone on the other side wasn't interested in time. The off-axis vehicle, the one with the emblem, repositioned slightly. Not aggressively. Just enough to shift oversight closer to convoy center. Deliberate. Calculated. And again I saw that familiar posture. Calm under pressure. Weight balanced forward slightly. Eyes scanning without obvious movement. Exactly how we train professionals to maintain situational awareness without escalating presence. It unsettled me more than overt hostility would have. Because it suggested competence. And competence means decisions won't be random. Negotiation continued verbally. Documentation reviewed again. Radio translators working both directions. On the surface, everything remained procedural. But then humanitarian drivers reported something quietly. Road behind us no longer clear. Another vehicle positioned there. No insignia. Engine running. Blocking easy withdrawal. Containment confirmed. Still no shots fired. Still technically a checkpoint. But operationally, we were fixed in place. Command authorized contingency posture. Not escalation, just readiness. Security personnel repositioned subtly. Medical teams prepped discreetly. Civilian drivers briefed quietly. Professional choreography. I stayed focused on communication. Clear language reduces misunderstanding. Misunderstanding causes unnecessary conflict. Then a message came through local liaison channels. Temporary detention for verification. Detention. Not inspection. That wording matters. Convoy leadership pushed back immediately. Diplomatic protocols cited. Humanitarian status emphasized. Legal framework invoked. Response from their side remained calm. Too calm. Like they expected resistance. And that's when movement finally happened. Not chaotic. Not aggressive. Just efficient. Several armed personnel approached selected vehicles. Not brandishing weapons dramatically, just ready. Structured. This wasn't spontaneous. It was planned. Our security element held position. Rules of engagement clear, avoid escalation unless directly threatened. Humanitarian context always complicates response options. And suddenly, through the partially opened door of that off-axis vehicle, I saw his face clearly. Older, of course. Sharper around the edges. But unmistakable. My son. He didn't look surprised. Just focused. Professional. Like someone executing a task he believed necessary. That realization hit in layers. First recognition. Then concern. Then operational clarity. Because whatever brought him there, he was now part of the force controlling the situation. And emotion had to wait. Negotiation intensified. Higher command fully engaged. Verification channels accelerating. The checkpoint personnel remained composed, but their objective was clear. They weren't inspecting supplies. They were controlling movement. Possibly detaining specific individuals. Possibly gathering leverage. And my son was involved. Not aggressively. But unmistakably. Which meant two things simultaneously. I needed to keep everyone safe. And I needed to understand why he was standing on that side of the road. Because whatever organization had recruited him years earlier had now placed him directly opposite me in a conflict environment. And neither of us had planned that outcome. But outcomes don't ask permission. They unfold. And this one was moving faster by the minute. Recognition lasted maybe half a second. That's all I allowed it. In conflict environments, emotional hesitation can cost more than discomfort. Training doesn't eliminate feeling, it just teaches you where to put it temporarily. So I acknowledged internally what I'd seen, and returned immediately to procedure. Because whether that was truly my son or just someone who looked similar, the operational reality stayed the same. We were contained. Humanitarian convoy fixed in place. Unknown authority asserting control. And escalation risk rising quietly. Command channels finally confirmed partial information, the checkpoint wasn't officially sanctioned. Contractor liaison authority unclear. Diplomatic clearance requests still unresolved. Translation, nobody upstream fully knew who controlled that road anymore. That happens more often than people realize. Influence shifts faster than paperwork. My son, if it was him, stayed near the oversight vehicle. Not leading aggressively. More like coordination support. Tablet in hand. Radio headset. Exactly how private security intermediaries operate between military forces and local authority structures. Professional. Controlled. Detached. And that detachment worried me. Because it meant he believed in what he was doing. Negotiation stretched. Voices stayed calm on both sides. That's the paradox of professional standoffs, the calmer everyone sounds, the higher the stakes usually are. Panic causes mistakes. Calm allows strategy. Eventually, higher headquarters authorized conditional compliance. Not surrender. Not detention acceptance. Just controlled verification under observation. Humanitarian priorities often demand flexibility. Supplies matter. Civilians depend on delivery. And sometimes the safest way forward is temporary cooperation while diplomatic channels catch up. Vehicles opened selectively. Documentation reviewed again. Medical supplies inspected. All procedural on the surface. But underneath, I saw something else. Personnel from his organization weren't interested in cargo. They watched people. Faces. Conversations. Body language. Data collection. That aligned with what I'd suspected years earlier, the program trained observation first, action second. Information leverage. My son avoided direct eye contact initially. Not avoidance exactly, operational discipline. Acknowledging personal connection in that environment could complicate both our positions. Still, eventually our eyes met. Briefly. No visible reaction from him. But recognition was there. Clear. Controlled. Professional. And strangely, not hostile. That mattered. Because hostility escalates fast. Recognition without hostility leaves room for resolution. Time passed like that, structured interaction masking underlying tension. Our convoy leadership stayed composed. Their personnel stayed efficient. Nobody raised voices. Nobody postured unnecessarily. Classic controlled power negotiation. Then the unexpected shift happened. Command received new diplomatic clearance confirmation. Rapid. Higher level than before. Probably triggered by Interpol-linked intelligence cooperation I'd helped initiate months earlier. Suddenly, their posture softened slightly. Not retreat. Adjustment. Orders relayed quietly. Vehicles repositioned. Road behind us cleared incrementally. Containment loosening. And my son stepped forward personally. First time directly. Professional tone. Neutral expression. Verification complete, he said calmly. You're cleared to proceed. Nothing personal. Nothing emotional. Just operational closure. But as we prepared to move, he added quietly, barely audible outside professional range. Not here. Not now. Message received. Conversation postponed. Convoy resumed movement minutes later. No escalation. No casualties. Humanitarian supplies continued safely. Mission technically successful. But internally, everything had shifted. Because I now knew for certain. The organization that recruited him operated actively in conflict zones. Influencing access. Managing information. Possibly more. And my son wasn't just employed by them. He was trusted enough to stand at the center of a controlled standoff. Which meant whatever came next wouldn't stay purely professional for long. Not with family involved. And definitely not with that emblem still appearing wherever influence mattered most. After kilometer 19, nothing felt theoretical anymore. Before that day, my son's career and my operational world overlapped conceptually. Same region. Similar networks. Parallel responsibilities. But still separate. Now they weren't. We'd stood on opposite sides of the same road, under the same pressure, negotiating the same uncertainty. No hostility, but definitely no clarity either. And clarity is what keeps professionals safe. The convoy continued without incident. Supplies delivered. Civilian coordination stable. Official reports framed the checkpoint as temporary administrative complication. That's diplomatic language for situations nobody fully wants to explain publicly. But inside operational circles, the discussion was sharper. Private contractor influence increasing. Local authority fragmentation. Information control becoming a strategic tool. All familiar patterns in modern hybrid conflicts. My son's organization sat right in the middle of that space. Not military. Not civilian. Not fully accountable either. Exactly the kind of entity that shapes outcomes quietly. Days passed before I heard from him directly. Encrypted message. Professional channel, not personal. Just a time, a location, and one line. Neutral ground. No uniforms. That told me everything. He wasn't avoiding contact. He was controlling conditions. We met at dusk outside a partially restored administrative building used by multiple agencies. Neutral territory in every operational sense, cameras present, security nearby, but no single authority dominant. He looked older than when he'd left home. Not physically exhausted. Just, sharpened. Experience does that. Neither of us rushed the conversation. Professionals understand pacing. Emotional reactions rarely produce useful outcomes in complex environments. You shouldn't have been at that checkpoint, I said finally. Neither should you, he replied calmly. Fair point. We spoke carefully. No operational specifics. No sensitive disclosures. Just broad context. He confirmed what I'd already suspected. His organization positioned itself where official authority blurred. Mediation, access control, information filtering. Sometimes stabilizing situations. Sometimes managing outcomes less transparently. And you're comfortable with that? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. I believe I understand it, he said eventually. Understanding isn't the same as agreement. But it's often the first step. Then he said something that shifted the conversation. You're assuming you saw the whole picture that day. Meaning? Checkpoint wasn't just about you, he added. There were other factors. He didn't elaborate. Operational confidentiality again. Still, the tone wasn't defensive. More like warning. Before we parted, he said quietly. There's movement coming. Larger than that checkpoint. Stay flexible. Not a threat. Not reassurance either. Information. Family information, delivered professionally. That's a complicated space. Back at base, intelligence updates started reflecting increased activity across multiple regions. Contractor redeployments. Authority reshuffling. Supply routes reassessed. Something was shifting operationally. And my son was close enough to it to know early. That knowledge carried weight. Not because I doubted his intentions. But because conflict zones compress timelines fast. Relationships, loyalties, responsibilities, everything gets tested under pressure. And we'd already crossed the line where family and professional worlds intersected directly. Which meant future encounters wouldn't stay controlled indefinitely. Especially if whatever movement he hinted at escalated. War zones rarely give families clean boundaries. They give moments. Brief ones. And those moments determine what comes next. I had a feeling our next meeting wouldn't be neutral ground. It would be somewhere neither of us expected. And possibly under conditions neither of us could control. The shift came faster than anyone expected. 1 week the region was tense but manageable. Supply routes functioning. Local coordination stable enough. Contractor presence visible but balanced. The kind of fragile calm modern conflict zones operate on. Then the city started closing. Road access restricted first. Officially for security optimization. Then checkpoints multiplied, some legitimate, some questionable, some clearly opportunistic. Communications slowed. Power disruptions increased. Civilians began moving out quietly. Classic pre-siege indicators. Command briefings shifted tone quickly. Humanitarian priorities elevated. Extraction contingencies reviewed. Contractor organizations, including the one my son worked for, repositioned toward infrastructure nodes. Control points. Information hubs. Places where influence matters most. I hadn't heard from him again since our neutral ground meeting. That wasn't unusual operationally. But the silence carried different weight now. We both knew conditions were deteriorating. The convoy system tightened. Fewer movements. More armored support. Diplomatic channels working overtime. Nobody wanted escalation, but escalation was happening anyway. Then came the first sustained engagement near our sector. Not chaotic. Not full assault. Just coordinated probing. Testing responses. Measuring reaction times. The kind of tactical pressure that precedes larger operations. We adapted quickly. Defensive posture. Communication discipline. Civilian coordination maintained carefully. Nothing dramatic publicly, but internally everyone understood. We were transitioning from advisory environment to active containment. And containment sometimes turns into siege. One evening intelligence updates confirmed it. Multiple access routes compromised simultaneously. Communications interference increasing. Contractor redeployments accelerating. Local authority fragmentation worsening. The city wasn't officially under siege. But functionally, it was heading there. That's when his message arrived. Short. Direct. Stay mobile. Avoid fixed buildings. Professional advice. Not emotional. Exactly what someone inside evolving operational structures would send. I followed it. Our advisory team shifted accommodations. Rotational positioning instead of static quarters. Increased situational awareness. Quiet preparation without visible alarm. Because visible alarm spreads faster than actual danger. Civilians started noticing changes too. Store closures earlier. Transportation unreliable. Families relocating temporarily. Subtle signals that stability was thinning. Through all of it, one thought stayed constant. Where was he positioned now? His organization specialized in influence zones. That meant infrastructure. Checkpoints. Coordination hubs. Possibly the very places becoming focal points of tension. Then came confirmation. Intercepted chatter referenced a contractor mediation team operating inside a contested district. Same emblem. Same organization. High-risk positioning. And suddenly the professional distance between us shrank dramatically. Not metaphorically. Geographically. Because our advisory sector overlapped that district. Meaning if escalation continued, we wouldn't just hear about each other. We'd operate in the same compressed space again. But this time not at a controlled checkpoint. In a city edging toward siege conditions. And siege environments don't allow neutral meetings. They force decisions. Rapid ones. Often incomplete. That night, looking over updated operational maps, I realized something clearly. If conflict intensified further, the next time I saw my son wouldn't be planned. And probably wouldn't be peaceful. Because siege conditions blur roles fast. Contractors become combat support. Advisors become defenders. And family becomes secondary to survival. Not by choice. By necessity. Siege doesn't always arrive with explosions. Sometimes it settles gradually, roads closing, communications thinning, resources tightening. By the time people officially call it a siege, operationally it's already been one for days. That's where we were. Movement restricted. Coordination complicated. Civilian safety increasingly fragile. Advisory roles shifting quietly toward defensive readiness. Still not open combat. But close enough. Our team relocated again, temporary defensive structure near a logistics corridor still partially functional. Concrete shell, multiple floors damaged but usable. Not ideal, but defensible. And defensibility suddenly mattered more than comfort. Night operations intensified. Not attacks exactly. Probing movement. Information gathering. Occasional indirect fire testing response times. Pressure without declaration. The kind of environment where mistakes happen fast. And then the corridor closed completely. No incoming convoys. No outbound movement. Officially, temporary interruption. Practically, containment. Inside that tightening perimeter, contractor presence increased. Mediation teams, infrastructure specialists, security coordinators, all trying to keep systems functioning long enough for diplomacy to catch up. My son's emblem appeared repeatedly in situation reports. Always near control points. Always where negotiation mattered. Always where risk concentrated. I hadn't seen him personally since kilometer 19. But the proximity was undeniable. One afternoon, reconnaissance indicated a small contractor unit moving toward our defensive structure. Not aggressive. Coordinated approach. Communication attempted through liaison channels. We prepared cautiously. Unknown intent means controlled reception. They arrived near dusk. Vehicles marked clearly. Personnel disciplined. No overt hostility. But tension obvious. Siege conditions amplify uncertainty on all sides. And then I saw him again. Closer this time. Dust on his uniform. Eyes sharper. Same professional calm. Same measured movement. But something heavier underneath, fatigue maybe, or responsibility weight. Neither of us acknowledged recognition immediately. Operational first. He briefed our command element professionally. Infrastructure status. Civilian evacuation corridors. Communication relay possibilities. Exactly the kind of mediation role his organization specialized in. Valuable work. Risky work. Necessary sometimes. Conversation stayed structured. No personal references. No emotional cues. Just professionals managing a deteriorating situation. Then external pressure escalated unexpectedly. Not direct assault. Just nearby engagement shifting quickly toward our sector. Noise closer. Communications accelerating. Defensive readiness increasing instantly. Chaos never announces itself politely. Vehicles repositioned. Personnel moved to cover. Coordination shifted from advisory to survival. In that compressed moment, roles blurred completely. Contractors. Advisors. Security elements. All just people trying to stabilize a volatile environment. And in the middle of that transition, circumstances forced something neither of us had planned. Temporary detention protocol activated for all external personnel inside the structure, standard siege precaution until identities confirmed through higher channels. Professional. Necessary. Impersonal. Which meant my son became part of that protocol. Not arrest. Not hostility. Just containment. But still technically my prisoner inside that defensive perimeter. He didn't resist. Didn't argue. Just nodded slightly when the situation was explained. Understanding. Professional acceptance. Family reaction postponed again. Because survival environments don't prioritize emotional clarity. They prioritize safety. Still, the irony wasn't lost on either of us. Years after that job offer. Years after training silence. We'd ended up here. Same building. Same siege conditions. Opposite operational responsibilities. And neither of us had expected that path. But paths in conflict zones rarely follow expectations. They follow pressure. And pressure had brought us back together. Under circumstances neither of us could fully control. The strange thing about sieges is how quietly they sometimes end. Not with victory speeches. Not with clear turning points. Just gradual easing, checkpoints reopening, communication stabilizing, pressure shifting elsewhere. That's what happened to us. For 48 hours, the building held. Not constant fighting, just tension. Occasional distant engagement. Logistics uncertainty. Enough to keep everyone alert but not enough to trigger full evacuation protocols. Inside, professional routine took over. Identity verification. Communication relays. Civilian coordination. My son's organization actually helped stabilize a few fragile infrastructure links during that window. Ironically, their presence, which once raised my concern, now contributed to preventing escalation. Context changes everything. He remained technically under our protective detention protocol the entire time. Not restrained. Not interrogated. Just contained until higher command confirmed contractor status formally. Professional necessity. Still, the symbolism wasn't lost on either of us. Years ago, they'd recruited him quietly. Years later, I'd effectively taken him into custody during a siege. Life rarely writes cleaner metaphors than that. We spoke briefly once conditions stabilized. Nothing operational. Nothing sensitive. Just two professionals acknowledging unusual circumstances. You didn't expect this, I said. No, he admitted. But I understand why it happened. That mattered. Understanding prevents resentment. And resentment in conflict environments complicates everything. External pressure eased gradually. Diplomatic channels reopened limited movement. Evacuation corridors established. Supply routes cautiously restored. The siege never got an official name. Just another, localized security incident, in formal reports. But everyone inside knew how close it came to becoming something bigger. When clearance finally arrived, contractor personnel, including my son, were released formally. Documentation signed. Status confirmed. Movement authorized. No dramatic farewell. Just professional closure. He paused before leaving. About that job offer years ago, he started. I know, I said. Not everything needs full verbal explanation. Some realizations settle naturally over time. His organization wasn't purely manipulative. Not purely protective either. Like most hybrid structures in modern conflict zones, complex, situational, sometimes helpful, sometimes opaque. He'd navigated it professionally. I'd navigated it cautiously. And somehow we both ended up safe. That's more than many families in similar environments get. Weeks later, the city stabilized fully. Civilian life resumed cautiously. Advisory roles scaled back. Contractor presence redistributed elsewhere. The building we'd held during the siege was eventually repaired. No plaque. No official recognition. Just another structure continuing its purpose quietly. Driving past it months later, I realized something simple. The story wasn't about capture. Not really. It was about timing. Opportunity offered. Silence learned. Paths crossing unexpectedly. And families surviving professional worlds that don't always align cleanly. My son still works in security consulting. Different organization now. More transparent oversight. Lessons absorbed. I returned fully to advisory work. Life normalized again. But every now and then, I think back to that checkpoint, that siege, that moment where professional duty briefly made me my own son's custodian. And I realize something important. War zones don't just test strategy. They test relationships. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes without anyone outside ever knowing. And maybe that's the real hidden chapter here. Not the capture. Not the siege. But the fact that, despite everything, we both walked away still family first. Even when circumstances temporarily made us something else. If this story stayed with you, there are more like it on Hidden Chapters. You can like the video and subscribe for the next chapter. And before you go, how much of this was decided by time alone?